Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son, Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Good morning, Dad. Thanks for having me on the show, and happy 50th wedding anniversary, which was yesterday on Saturday. So congratulations. And it's a lot going on this week in the news and things that I feel I've learned a little bit. I watched a couple of things on YouTube that were very insightful about the origin of the region and of the conflict of today about the Arab Revolution of the 1914, 1915, when they were brought in by England, or offered England is the way they present it. I'm not sure I believe all those details, but however it came about, whether the king of the Hashemites went to England and said, hey, I got a plan, I'll help you get rid of these Turks if you'll back our Arab Revolution. We want to come together as one big nation under the Hashemite kingdom, not under this Turkish guy, this Mustafa or whoever he was at the time. That's the way it's presented in history, as at least in this show from the English side of it, is that they came looking for help from the English, and so the English helped them. But what they did expose, that I learned from this show, was about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was the French and English agreement at that time about their future interests in that land. And that went down in 1915 behind the back of the Hashemite king, who was out telling all the people, hey, this is our chance. England's behind us. They're going to back us against the Turks to give us our national state, our Arab state for ourselves. And so while they're out fighting the Turks and rallying themselves into this, England and France are drawing up the map known as this Sykes-Picot Agreement that essentially split the Middle East into 2 halves as far as the known resources of the time that they could get their hands on. It divided it into quadrants, and what I want to play with, Dad, is the deeper idea of, okay, what if you were the people behind it funding it? Because who funded France at this time? Who funded England in 1915? Where was that money coming from? Is there some different funders? Have they gone out of business since then? Are there different people in charge of the gold in the world than there was 100 years ago? Whose plan are we on? And so who drew up these maps and agreed to this? Who funded this? And so I learned something out of this also about the Treaty of Versailles and all the criminals there. And, the way President Wilson was brought in to suggest he brings his 14 points into play about what ought to be done, which they reject, but they start this League of Nations out of it. And funny that the primary members are the ones that benefit from this property over there. Even Japan, which needed the oil, see? And so, and China, Japan, France, England, funny little co-op. And again, how far back does it go? Where's China getting its, who are they saying yes to in the back rooms exactly? So anyway, it was really enlightening me, Dad, because all the things that went down in Versailles in 1918 had sort of a twofold effect on the future. One, it actually laid the groundwork for what became this Nazi Party takeover, because from, now 20 years before that, they looted Germany. I mean, just brutally they just took everything. People are kind of understand that, the only hyperinflation event that I'm aware of outside of the more recent one, I think, that happened down in Argentina in my lifetime, was the one that happened to Germany, where it took, barrels full of their paper money. It was useless, right? Hyperinflation. And that was at this time. That's what they did to these people. That's what drove them into the arms of Hitler. And then who was Hitler? Some poor little shop clerk, we're told, that just captured the people's attention. Where did he get his money? Primarily funded by an American bank ran by a man named Prescott Bush. Oh yeah, same Bush. So, come on, draw the strings, connect the dots. That's what we're trying to do here. So anyway, Dad, for me, it was very enlightening to start just getting a little more of the detail into the picture of what was going on that lays the groundwork for all this. These people that were being stabbed in the back even while they were out doing the work. And that's why their descendants are still saying, hey, we expect England to make good, because they took that property. Because when you look at how the lines were drawn, what the Treaty of Versailles did was, as far as Europe, it provided for the looting of Germany. No more army, all these restrictions and all these things. That what it did, it broke up Germany into the states of like Hungary and Austria, the things out, that broke up their large empire into smaller parts and gobbled up all of their resources and all of their wealth and all. It's really criminal, and there were some people in the world that were against it at the time because of how criminal it was, even of the Allied side. It got them booed by their constituency, of course, but they saw the inherent injustice in it all and what it was going to cause. What are these poor people going to do? You're just going to steal everything and, turn them into paupers, and kind of like, I guess, what we did in Vietnam and what we did in South America. And anyway, the point being here is that, it not only paved the way for Germany, but then they came in, they being the industrialists, the American and English industrialists, Carnegie and Vanderbilt, and the people that built all that industry. Because what happened that they don't explain in this English side of history, the documentary just points out that Germany built up a powerful economy and an air force in spite of the League of Nations. Why? Well, because America didn't join, and so the League of Nations with France and England, they didn't have enough firepower. Excuse me? They just won the war. They made the terms, these unfair terms at the Treaty of Versailles, and then you say they just sat back and watched as Germany built up military and an economy to rival, and as it did, eventually outstrip their own. Kind of a funny thing, I've been pointing about what's happened with Russia under the nose of the UN the last 20 years, right, Dad? This is what I learned in this, watching this, reading between the lines. Here's what, happened. They're saying, oh, it just happened. Oh, Russia just built up. Yeah, but I've seen other history now where I see how it happened. The Carnegies and the Bushes and the Vanderbilts and these kind of people came to Germany and invested in it and brought them up in the technology. And that's why Germany's economy boomed, because the American and English industrialists were there with the high tech. That's kind of what went on in China a little bit. So after the revolution there, when they took over China and destroyed those people and took everything from them and instilled a sort of a slave industrial slave country system. So, yeah, anyway, but back on our point, I just want to, kind of fill in again. To me, it's all got to do with context. Where's the money? Where's the alliances in all this? And so that's what happened with Germany, right, Dad? They were the Prussian Empire, and then they finally got stopped in the Great War with Russia as an ally, because they were threatening to take over that territory as well. And so then the Treaty of Versailles told them, you don't get to do that anymore. You don't get to have a military, and then all these other sanctions and restrictions and just basically it allowed the other countries, France and England especially, to come in and loot them, just like they say we did to Russia, right? After what they call that damn revolution they have, Perestroika or whatever. And then what happened? Oh, the oligarchs, the American industrialists, the internationalists came in and looted them, we were told. Funny the pattern, Dad, is why I'm sticking with this part of the story for a minute. But the other side of the Treaty of Versailles provided for this mandate for France and England to carry out what had been proposed in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. See, that was just the agreement on what are we going to do when the war's over with this land, right? Why? In other words, France is saying and England saying we're both putting money into this thing. What are we going to do when it's done? Let's have something on paper. And it was called the Sykes. It is known today as the Sykes-Picot Agreement. That's what they got on paper. And what they implemented after the Treaty of Versailles were these mandates to turn Syria and Lebanon into under French control, and what is known as Iraq under British control, which gave Britain all the oil of Iraq and France access to all the riches of Syria, which I guess include transportation ways to the coast. England kept Haifa on the coast, so they weren't completely cut off by anyone. And what they called Palestine in those days, which was all that coastal area, which becomes part of Israel, Transjordan, and all of this, was international. See, but what it did at the time was it screwed this Arab. They couldn't have any self-rule. All these places they lived in Syria. Of course, it was their villages all over Iraq, but that's being administered by England now, my friend. You answer to English councils, not Arab councils in your towns and cities. I mean, think what an offense, Dad. This is what went on, right? And so this is I'm bringing it to bring it up to our, keep in mind the background of the territory that these bombs are dropping, and now who are paying for the bombs? Who are the players that are fighting in these territories with who? Have the Arabs ever owned any of this in the last 100 years? I mean, in the sense of, because we know all these countries like Syria are supported by France and supported by Russia. This is where they get their money, from selling their bases to Russia, from selling their goods to France, or doing trade with France and China and these other countries. This is where they get their, funny enough, tanks and planes I want to talk about today from one of the articles, Dad. What's happened since the League of Nations started at this time in 1918, which as part of its charter was to disarm the nations. Why should the countries fight with armaments over things, right? Make it a diplomatic settlement with some sort of body that can help make decisions on the critical matters as to what the policies will be. But meanwhile, nobody has these high potent weapons to say, no, we'll just kill our neighbor first and then we'll negotiate second. So funny that what happened instead is that what I want to get to later in an article, Dad, is all these arms dealers. It's all about arms races and arms dealers and countries buying the latest technology weaponry. Really funny when 100 years ago, what the countries who won the Great War decided to do was establish this League of Nations with these permanent members like France and England and China and Japan that would say, hey, let's not, let's disarm. Let's not do that. America, funny enough, wouldn't join. See why? Because then they'd have to put their army up, and that would mean that disarmament would be a reality as a policy. But as America stayed out of it, it provided the means for armament rather than disarmament to remain the policy. Isn't that, you're going to just tell me that just, oh, shucks, we missed an opportunity? No, that wasn't done on purpose. So anyhow, and then as a final insult, Dad, the Kingdom of Saud is funded by England in Arabia to fight with the Hashemites, who at that time had all of the holy sites. That was their claim to being the ones to run the Arab state. We're the line of Muhammad. We're the official holiness. We're the official keepers of all the holy sites. All the people are with us. We want you to help us defeat those Ottomans and get those, they're buggers. They're not nice. They're not right. They're not holy. They're not the right people. We are. That's what I'm seeing. That's whether England came to them with that story, hey, you guys are the right guys. Why don't you take these guns and go kill those Ottomans? Or whether the Hashemites came to England and said the same thing. That seems to be where the crux of it was at. And the conversation went, yeah, you guys, okay, go kill those Ottomans. We'll give you the guns. And in the middle of that, they made a deal with France, or France and England made their deal, because they were both putting the money in primarily into the war against Germany at that time, of what they were going to do over there in the Middle East after they'd gotten the Ottomans destroyed. And what they did was stab these Hashemites in the back, and then England goes and funds these Kingdom of Saud, who takes Mecca and Medina from the Hashemites, right? And that's the way it brings us up into our more modern picture of that territory where this Wahhabi extremism gets set up, funded by England originally. And they're in conflict now with who? The people England said they were going to make a deal with. You talk about a real son of a gun, old England on this one. So now, Dad, that, remember when you were talking about how the modern king, Abdullah of Jordan, the Hashemite king, has a website that calls for England to return to their original, hey, man, you told us we were going to have our Arab state that we could run. You guys didn't need to be in our world. So now it's time to get out of our world. And I think, Dad, when we bring it into our modern look, that's exactly what this whole Arab Spring was all about. And that's why the countries like Jordan and all the bought and paid for countries with the West are going along with it, because it's their destabilizing of this nationalistic Arab world into a destabilized world that now can become someone's caliphate. It can then get reorganized. It couldn't be organized until you destabilize it. It's already all the, what's Gaddafi going to do after 40 years? Say, oh, here, just take my country? What are all these people going to do after they've, nobody's going to give up their home, give up their power. And so that's just the natural flow of things. So it took this destabilization, known in our parlance as the Arab Spring, to bring about this state of complete hell and war and civil war that we have over there. And I'm not sure where to cut from here because I have so many things to talk about, Dad, with that. So before I go to the articles, let me talk about this other interesting thing that that I learned this week on the internet, watching a YouTube from the Sheikh Hussein channel. He had posted something which was, he wasn't in it, but a couple of his students were the people being interviewed by what sounded to me like an American, maybe a Canadian interviewer who has a blog and a site called I think it's called The Ugly Truth. And I've checked out his website momentarily and listening to him. He's got the story from the Zionistic push, that's the real, when you look at what's going on in the world, it's this push to kill all the Arabs and take their territory. That's where the money and all the power has been focused for now 20, 30 years, maybe 100 years, except that I question that because it seems like they could have done that 100 years ago when they had it. And that's why I want to bring in that deeper ploy of a third world war, of the Jews and the Arabs destroying each other. This is where I'm trying to go a little bit right now, Dad. Why is it that they had much more control and power then to be able to turn away the entire Arab, a much more united Arab front? They were able to defeat the Ottoman Empire with that Arab front and their own, and of course through Russia from the north. We know it was a united bombardment on the Ottomans at that time. But they defeat the Ottoman Empire, and they use these guys, promising them their Arab state, and then completely just, sorry, too bad. I mean, they had that kind of power then. So, I'm just wondering when all these different states took over so much power, these divided Arab kingdoms now. Syria has 8 million people next to the France and England and America and all the NATO allies allied, that have interests going back 100 years to protect, and ties to that interest, and why any of these people would step out of line. How do you become president in the modern 19th and 20th century if you're someone whose political platform is stepping out of line? See, unless they're playing these people, as I'm presenting, is more and more to me becoming obvious, that unless the bankers have to keep a red and a blue team, you can't make it all one color. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with the world wanting to disarm and be peaceful and left alone, right? So you have to keep, there has to always be a war. And part of what was presented in the Treaty of Versailles, the outcome of it was also led to the Cold War situations, which led to the Cold War. So all of that stuff appears to have been well engineered at the time. And again, if it was well engineered 100 years ago, whose money went into that? When did they lose their ability to fund and to seek their own gain and to keep funding it and to keep getting it? When have those castles changed hands? Let's just start there. How many castles do you know, people listening out there, how many castles there are in the world? Do you know who owns them? It's a pretty small group of people. And guess what? It's just, they don't change hands very often. They've been in the same hands for a long time. Okay, so this other thing I learned, Dad, was listening to these students of Sheikh Imran Hussein, talking to this guy who seems to know the Zionistic trip in the world. And he's hip to the fact that part of Zionism is in dividing Muslims from Christians on a line that doesn't exist. That's what got me over into, I guess that's why I came to the Sheikh Imran Hussein thing, and why I kept listening to it, is when he introduced it, he's a guy that advocates this Christian-Muslim unity, and that the same thing I'm always talking about, that they're being set up as an enemy. Okay, so he's got most of the story, but he's got a bunch of blanks in there. He doesn't understand, because he doesn't understand his eschatology, just like Sheikh Hussein is always saying. And so from this interview, what I really learned, Dad, is that, first of all, the Mahdi that's supposed to appear for the Sunnis, that our world, and I think this is important for people, because you're not going to get this in our media, right? If you're not listening to something like these guys, which most of the Americans aren't, if you're lucky enough to have stumbled onto Dad's show this week, then listen to me for a minute, okay? Because the Islam is not waiting for their Mahdi to come like Jesus and lead the world and fight Jesus or anything like that at all. The Shia Mahdi is someone who's a reincarnation. They're waiting for a reincarnation like from someone that's been here before. Very much like the Hindus in their idea of Krishna. Though, of course, the Hindus are one of the great enemies of the monotheistic Islam. But the Shia Mahdi is a man that will reappear that's been here before. The Sunni Mahdi is a man that's never been here that will appear on the scene of history as an original character. And it will be a man who will be a leader of like a rebellion. Not any great king, not some angel, no spiritual power. It will be a man leading a rebellion. The one who saves this man is Jesus on his return. I mean, how many Christians know that angle to the Mahdi story? I'd never heard it before, but these two students of Islamic eschatology were discussing all this issue of Iran. It was a deeper issue of how Iran fits, and it's this deeper issue I want to get to of how Shia-Sunni civil war fits. And what they were, and in that talk, what I learned is how this Mahdi is a man, and he will ultimately be cornered up near Damascus. He will come out of Mecca or Medina. He's going to do the reverse trip that the prophet made. The prophet came out of perhaps Medina and went to Mecca, I think is the correct thing. He came up in Medina, was persecuted, and went to Mecca, and that's where he found success and built his army, the Prophet Muhammad. Well, this Mahdi will rise in Mecca and go to Medina. And from Medina, that's what they were saying. Okay, I don't know my Quranic scriptures, but the students that seem to, this is what I've learned. And this Mahdi will then raise his rebellion, his army, against some false representation of Islam, which I'm going to assume now, in the way we've been studying it, Dad, is our good caliph here that's gone out conquering and to conquer, that's claiming to be the caliph. The one that Turkey now at that point is going to be saying, no, he's not, we're the caliph, right? Iran's going to be saying that can't be him. Our Mahdi is coming back. Our Mahdi has returned. I don't know how Iran's going to, in my opinion, become the king of the East that finally has that way prepared for it with the drying up of the river Euphrates, so that conflagration can reach that sort of fever pitch that everyone seems to anticipate in this great war, this Malhama of the Muslims, this Armageddon of the Christians. And that, and so I've been trying to track that, Dad, now, not only in the news, but through this understanding, because I'm trying to reconcile the eschatological viewpoints, as you know. And as I say, now I'm learning a little more that the Mahdi, at least from the Sunni point of view, is a man. And so this man will eventually be cornered up near Damascus, funny enough, near where the Christians call Armageddon. And Jesus will descend on the wings of two angels, according to the Muslim understanding, and will save the Mahdi and support the Mahdi as the leader of his people. And the Mahdi will worship Jesus, not the other way around. That's been twisted, see, by whoever wants to twist it, right? Whoever doesn't want to see because at least both sides could be presented equally, but no, we only get the side that, the Mahdi's going to come and chop off all the heads of the Christians. But that's actually a twisted version that isn't true at all. That's exactly the opposite of the truth. Just like Christianity, where all the non-believers are going to hell. That's really not the truth at all. And one of the other things I thought was interesting, Dad, is one of these students brought up the reality as they know it from the study of their scripture, that the infidel is not the non-believer, just like the way I am trying to point out in the Judeo-Christian scripture. There's no hell for non-believers. What are you talking about? That's not in the scripture. Well, they're saying there's no, that's not the way the words are interpreted whatsoever. That's not what the infidel is. It's quite clear that Christians, Jews, all sorts of other people who live this righteousness, who believe in this sovereignty of God and live that righteousness of, sort of a do unto others. From what I understood their conversation, all have their reward with Allah. I mean, anybody ever heard that before in the Christian world? I mean, that blew my mind. I was like, wow, I never heard anything like that. I mean, how come that's not at least presented? There's people out there teaching it in their world. Why aren't we at least making an exposition of those people, so that at least the discussion, I mean, we might be able to build up, find out, is that really where they're coming from? Are they really not wanting to chop anybody's heads off? Why wouldn't we be building a coalition of that if they weren't using this other angle? And so all of that was seen quite clearly in this interview, I thought, by this English or Canadian interviewer, whoever he was, Mark something or other from The Ugly Truth. He certainly saw that there's a narrative being pushed by the West, but he couldn't quite get his finger on what it was, and I say it's because he's just missing a couple of the eschatological elements that we have as part of our construct and the context into which we're fitting all these things. So one of the things I thought was extremely, extremely, perhaps the most vital thing that I learned, Dad, was that one of these students pointed out that what they've been noticing in these past years, over these years since the 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan, the war on Iraq, this basic war on extreme Islam and all of that's being funded by the extremists themselves and funded by the West, that what she's noticed is that instead of the state of Israel being the number one enemy of Sunni Islam, instead of that being their political mantra, their focus, that Sunni Islam is that the state of Israel is Sunni Islam's real enemy, that's who's persecuting them, that's who's causing them all the trouble, that's who they have to war against. Increasingly, it's Shia Islam. That Israel isn't their number one enemy. That's why all these states like Jordan and these Sunni states, Saudi Arabia and such, they got no problem with Israel. They got treaties with Israel. They can get along with Israel. It's those darn Shia Muslims in Iran that they can't get along with, see? Isn't that an interesting little part of the puzzle, right? From this perspective that we've been expecting Shia-Sunni civil war, and that seems to be exactly what they're funding. because all these moderate Sunnis, they don't see Israel as their enemy. They see Shia Islam, their brothers and sisters in Islam, that simply is just like the Protestant Catholic thing, right? I mean, how easy are these patterns to detect? Don't tell me they're not patterns, just like the pattern going all the way back to, Machiavelli. Don't tell me that these aren't still the way the people in power, examine their philosophies and put in place their, implement their strategies so that they can continue in their power and divide and conquer. That goes all the way back to Caesar, right? That was a problem that Caesar faced. How am I going to take an army of 100,000 against 1,000,000 people? Or an army of 10,000 against 100,000, I believe was his original problem. Well, I got to get them fighting each other first and go in and mop up the mess. So anyway, Dad, not to digress, but I think these are key elements in the construct and the context that I'm always trying to fit. Anybody can read these articles and give them any sort of light they want because they say all sorts of things depending on who you believe. If ISIS is real, it can all be ISIS. I've been saying Anonymous was BS for all this long and part of the system, haven't I? Back when they first started, I could tell that was all part of the plan, just like the last people that fooled me were years ago with this Patriot Party in the U.S. And I thought, oh, wow, there's actually Americans that are getting together to have their own party. But, I was blogging at that time, wasn't I, Dad? Well, here's what they would have to do. Here's the platforms they would have to assert. And they would have to, use their collective voice at this moment to assert that no one should even be allowed to participate in politics that doesn't conform to certain standards now. But of course, they just became that they're a part of the system. And so anyway, all of these news articles, if you can't read between the lines and place them in a context and a geopolitical sort of dynamic that's all happening before our eyes, like I keep saying, a masquerade. It's like a big masquerade ball. But somebody's organized this play, this masquerade, like an opera, and the players are operating according to their role, even though that doesn't mean they're all in on it, in the sense that people aren't sending their children to die because it's a plan. They've had their strings pulled for probably far before this time of the Treaty of Versailles. These guys are string pullers. The people who were at that treaty, these criminals, were already the criminals of their day that were working for the bankers that sold out the resources of their country. So they didn't originate any of this. They were working for somebody. Those castles had already been built and owned by the bankers. So, keep chasing it back and you might eventually get to who's in charge here. But the one place that I will say where our eschatology, where the big question is to me, is that they seem to know that Armageddon or the Great War precedes the arrival of their Mahdi. That's the way they read their eschatology, or at least I should say Sheikh Hussein does, who's the best source I can find. And so Jesus and the Mahdi both arrive after Armageddon. All right. Now, most Christians imagine Armageddon as this culmination, but most traditional Christianity has no vision of it as events that are going on for 3.5 years at a very minimum that culminate in something. And the question that it brought me to, Dad, that I want to discuss maybe as we go through Revelation at that time, is the timing of Armageddon. Is it really the final event? Is it in the middle? When is that war and such? So all I'll say is that the Quranic scriptures convince the best scholar of their eschatology that seems to exist on the planet that it happens before the Mahdi and before the Jesus returns. And because Jesus returning is their sign of signs. That's why the discussion came up amongst them as to, why are they looking for the Mahdi? Why is that their sign? Right? The sign of the end times in their world, in the world of the Quran, to the scholars of Quran, the sign of signs, the mother of all signs, is the return of the Son of Mary. That's their sign. Every other sign keys on that. I mean, how come that's not the most talked about thing in the Christian world that's calling them our enemies, as at least an attempt to to bring the ties of reconciliation, to present the possibility of reconciliation? Hey, you guys, we're both waiting for the same thing. It's those darn Jews that aren't waiting for that. But instead, this modern Western Christianity is putting all its money and effort and bombs and trust and whatever, political, social energy into supporting this Zionist Israel in that land, who are the very people that aren't waiting for Jesus to return. So I find this very interesting. Here's the big question to me, Dad, and we'll have to take it up when we discuss Revelation, but I'm going to throw it out there because it's part of our discussion all the time, in the sense of this false Messiah arising, and when and through who and how. To Sheikh Hussein, the false Messiah is also after Armageddon, because this is a person who is the spirit of this false Messiah is engineering to take over the world in place of the true Messiah, and is going to rise up to claim, I am the Messiah of the Jews. And they're the one that's going to try and take over all that land for the Jews. See? That's the way he sees it. But I think that what he's missing is our understanding of Daniel, in the way the people of the prince that come destroy the city. What I don't see those people talking about in that interview that I listened to, Dad, is that all the eschatological views eventually find Israel destroyed, don't they? And so who does the destruction? The prince. And so how can that be after Armageddon? His argument is because this false Messiah is trying to impersonate the true Messiah, and what the true Messiah is said is going to return and rule the world forever from Jerusalem, the holy city. So that's what the false Messiah has to do. And to do that, Sheikh Hussein, I think rightly sees, takes the wiping out of the world powers the way they are. You're not going to rule the world from Jerusalem now with America, Russia, all the world powers, all the Arab kingdoms being as strong as they are. So you need this great war to decimate the world. Because the way he sees it, Russia and America will launch, and Europe will launch their nuclear weapons at each other over this. And North America and Europe, the Western Europe, will be decimated. I still think that our eschatology demonstrates, all the way up through someone like Nostradamus, that though there'll be wars, it's these natural disasters that seem to overtake the world. Mountains on fire that fall into the sea and such. Is that describing a missile coming down? It didn't sound like it. A mountain on fire. So hail and earthquakes, stars falling to the sky, I suppose that could be a lot of rockets. But I'm just saying that you can't avoid the idea that it looks like a lot of natural disasters. Sun, in the Quran, one of the major signs is the sun rises from the west. And what kind of, what has to happen to the earth for something like that to happen or appear to happen? Or is that just symbology, right? So, like saying all gods are one, or, that's been proposed because it seems impossible. How's the sun going to rise from the west? So if we're waiting for that to happen, it's like one of the hadiths that say that when the Mahdi returns, he'll come on a donkey with big ears flying through the sky as fast as the clouds and not recognize that as a symbol for an airplane and imagine that there's going to be an actual donkey that's going to be flying through the sky. So, this is what you have to negotiate when you're looking at Scripture and prophecy. You have to be able to keep your mind open and fit all the elements. And that's what I'm always attempting to do, Dad, and why to me it's important to always get back to these foundational discussions so that when we discuss and go through the articles for the week, there's always that, people don't have to go back to the very beginning to hear what, where we're coming from. And as I say, I'm learning more all the time. And here's something I thought was interesting as I was studying a little for the Sunday's Bible study in Revelation. For some reason, I started reading Jeremiah. And Jeremiah in the 25th chapter, because I just thought, is this all pertaining to back then, Babylon and this whole thing about Babylon and the captivity and the restoration and all this kind of element playing out as part of the pattern that we're watching in our day, because we're watching the end of a story that goes that far back. So what I found is, and I don't want to read it all, but I'm going to go through some of this Sunday if anyone's interested. Because, of course, this is where they're told 70 years that he's going to destroy the land where they're in. The whole land, and this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years, and it shall come to pass when 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and his people for their iniquities, says the Lord. And also the land of the Chaldeans, I will make it a perpetual desolation. Okay, that's why I brought it up. A perpetual? Perpetual sounds like, I don't know, perpetual, right? Non-ending, enduring. So interesting, where is the land of the Chaldeans? It's pretty much the border between Iraq and Iran today, all the way up through the, Syria. It's almost that swath that they show me when they show me the land that ISIS occupies. They're in the land of the Chaldeans. So, interesting, perpetual desolation. And so, of course, that land has never been, since then, never come into any sort of modern technology, has it? There's no skyscrapers over there. There's no, right? It's just constant war, at least all my life. I really can't speak for the thousands of years in between, but I find it an interesting expression, a perpetual desolation, and we come thousands of years later, and we're talking Persia, man. We're talking the richest area of the world. These are the people that invented chess, right? This is where the oil comes from. This is where the mathematics, language, philosophy, metaphysics, nothing really doesn't come from there. This is the birthplace of humanity. And all the deepest things of humanity can be traced back to their Persian roots in this land. And instead, it's, New York City and Alabama and Mexico City and, right? Miami, Florida. These places have the big buildings, the high tech, the whatever, but not the land of the Chaldeans. Perpetually at war and up until what, the 19th century, 20th century, nomads with swords and such, right? So anyway, I thought that was an interesting little tidbit to add to our take on it from our eschatological perspective, which we don't often anymore jump back into the biblical perspective. We've been staying mostly in the secular world of all these articles and such. But anyway, I wanted to really want to keep people's minds on there is a Quranic interpretation, and it's not as far apart as you think if you think you know the Quranic interpretation from what you learn through the media. You do not hear this in the media, right? Which is what that one person was pointing out. They don't even have their own people. And in an unrelated lecture I listened to from Shia-Sunni this past week, he was pointing out from their Quran how it says that my people have left the Quran. They don't pay attention. They don't study it. They don't follow it. Isn't that funny how all three mono-religions have that in common? The Jews have left their religion all the way back from Moses. He told them you're going to leave it and God's going to punish you. But don't worry, eventually he'll restore you. And they all tell him that all the way down through time, even Jesus, right down to their Messiah. And then the Christians have in their final expression in Revelation through this church, the 7 letters to the church, shoot, 5 of them he's got something against them. They just can't seem to stick with him. Only two expressions of his church, of his calling, exist in the world according to this sort of symbology, the way as far as I can read it. Those that love their brotherly love, where you really show that love, you show the love of God in your life, or you're willing to be persecuted for the reality of God, being the Messiah, being the only one, because that's the issue to them, who are religious and have a purpose to demonstrate God to their brothers and sisters, I guess, to the world, like the Jews. Their whole purpose is to demonstrate God to the world. So those are the only two things, and Christians, of course, are supposed to be the embodiment of that. And so you're either showing it through love or you're standing the persecution of that to death. Those are the only two things. Everything else is sort of anti-religion. It's just BS, hollow, house of cards. But that's what's been blown up, into being religion. That's what comes down to us as our traditional understandings on both sides. So understand that there's Quranic scriptures, but you're not going to hear them from most of the other side either. Isn't that amazing? That all the eschatology that does exist is talked about by a few people that have bothered to sustain the persecution or do it out here on our own in obscurity, but you're just not going to get it from the mainstream people. So, I don't know. I'm not tooting my own horn, but I'm telling you, I feel lucky I found this answer. And if you don't feel lucky to have found Dad's station, then, well, change the channel or support it, because I'd like to see this station. I'd like to see more people participating, like we've had the last couple weeks in the Bible study. And so the Bible study is becoming a little more fun, and I'm looking forward to Wednesday. So, Dad, sorry to keep you waiting on the discussion on the articles, but I never find anymore the articles as interesting as the growth of knowledge as to the illuminating the deeper hand that's the puppeteer. We're always taking this detailed look at the marionette and the staging, but I like to try and throw some light as often as possible on the deeper construct, not just a person like a puppeteer, but the way the whole structure works. It works with a puppeteer pulling strings. That puppeteer appears to be the bankers that go all the way back to the Vatican, funny enough, funding the Rothschild banking system in the 1600s at very, most recent understanding of it. The people that just happen to own all those castles I was talking about. They come down through time as the modern banking system. They develop the system of fractional reserve banking. They infiltrate all the modern civilizations against many of those civilizations' best I don't want to say interest, because of course it's against their interest, but even against their best sort of protest, right? America threw them out. Many countries threw them out. Told them, get out of here. We don't want your bank. We don't need your central bank. That's not the direction we're taking it. We're not letting you guys. We don't need your protection. Don't you see how big we are? What are you going to do for us? So they finally got their way. And I've always, who else? I mean, you think it's gotten easier on the world to get away? All the evidence is there. Greece, the EU, the way that the system that they put into place has made the resources constantly be funneled into the same international group of interests, while the sort of totalitarian regimes get more power. Anything democratic becomes, far, far more of all of the democracies, and anybody with a social democracy, they become more and more fascistic in the way that their society is manipulated. It keeps being manipulated toward a much more corporate-run government of fascists and what we have today, oligarchs. We don't even have oligarchs. We basically have a fascist-run society. The oligarchs run the fascist-run society, if you want to keep with this vision that the way I see it all coming down. And so now on this surface level, who have you got but, as I say, masqueraders, puppets, marionettes on a stage. So on that stage this week, Daddy-O, from Friday the 20th, AFP article by Anna Malpass, Russia warns Assad on vow to retake all of Syria. I find this hysterical. Tell me to me it's just evidence Assad's strings are being pulled. Why would you be blaring your mouth off like that against the wishes of Russia? If you remember, Dad, a few weeks ago we read an article where they were telling us that one of the problems over there is that Russia and Syria have, a conflict of interests. Russia can't control Syria, even though they have to stay involved and keep bombing the government's enemies because they have a vested interest in all those bases and such that they've built. I already went through my story about that. I think I poked holes in the fact that with Russia's guns, it wouldn't be so hard to tell Assad that he'd be happy to back anybody that would listen to him. And so I think all of this is, for me, is part of the play right now, but it's coming out. And I say it's just all part of showing how many points of conflict are there, so that, what do we get out of Revelation, Dad, at one point? Frog spirits coming out of the mouth of these other living creatures that go out and drag the king. It says that they entice, or they work miracles, it seems, that entice the kings of the world to come to this place of battle. Interesting the way that it says that. In other words, they somehow have this bent to go to this one place and all go fight each other. And this is kind of what I'm seeing develop in the news right now, with the fact that Russia isn't supporting Syria because he's his best buddy. Syria doesn't want what Russia's selling necessarily, is what they're showing us. He's out to be a maverick now. He's going to take over all of Syria on his own. How's he going to do that without Russia? So sounds silly to me, but they're pointing out that there's this schism there. And I don't want to waste time on that article because there's some better ones, I think, this week, or more appropriate ones before I use up all my time. From the 18th, I guess that would be Thursday, February 18th, AP article by Darlene Superville. Is that a real name? Obama okays new sanctions against North Korea over nuclear program. So yeah, old North Korea, they'd rather be in sanctions than not threaten the world. And I kind of wanted to read one part of this article, Dad, because it made me think, are you kidding me? Both actions led, these actions of North Korea launching a satellite carrying a rocket and conducting an underground nuclear test. Both actions led to worldwide condemnation of the reclusive country and fueled fears that it continues to move toward building an atomic arsenal. So North Korea is just up, and I just find it. Maybe they are. It's what everybody else does, right, Dad? It's one of the things I want to really get to this week. Is my point in what the articles show. That just seems to be what everybody wants to do. I've talked before. North Korea was described as oppressed or depression. This is not a rich country. North Korea is not known as this isn't Saudi Arabia, oil for guns program, right? They don't get to just throw their money around on, we got a lot of extra money. Everybody wants to come to North Korea, right? Our economy's booming. Let's build up a huge military. We need nuclear, don't we? What I find so interesting is, to bring up where I started in the 1918 League of Nations, the people that won the Great War with the money of the big bankers behind them decided they were going to start a League of Nations, and one of the things they were going to do is disarm and keep from military confrontations having to be used to solve everything. Kind of interesting. And then the United Nations takes their place with the strength of the American military now. And still, what do we get 50 years later? More. A world just where it seems even the poorest countries, Yemen has they're buying new weapons to fight. So I just find it astounding. And so into all this mix, North Korea is not being the smart country that I thought Koreans were. As people, when you meet Koreans, they seem to be fairly therapeutic, kind of analytical people. You'd think that on the smart play it would be, hey, who wants to get in there's just too many people with guns these days. Let's be like Switzerland. Look how well they do. Neutral countries that spend almost nothing on military. They become neutral. Look how well they do. All these countries with their military aspirations, especially if you don't happen to be in line with America's military aspirations, how good do they do? What's the track record here, North Korea? Who do you expect to impress with all this posturing? So I'm wondering, who loans them the money to borrow all this, to posture this? Who tells that government to posture this way? When again, history shows for too long now that the money goes and funds the people to have the government in these poor countries that will posture the way that's the best interest for the bankers that paid for that government to get into place. So you show me where that line's been cut anywhere in history, because that's the Professor Quigley angle that I understand, and why he could envision or explain to us, reveal to us this potential of a new world order run by a cartel of people that had the potential to do it, because it's no big deal for them to infiltrate a little country like North Korea. What's North Korea gonna do about it, right? See, but now we can say, oh, they're going to launch a nuclear weapon. Well, who gave them why did we let them have that? Why did the League of Nations allow that sort of premise? Why did the UN, when they took over in ideology, why does North Korea spend their money on that kind of thing? Why is that ideology in place? Who paid for that ideology to be the one that grew up in the world is the deeper, notion I'm trying to push this week, Dad. I think it's pretty clear to anybody who studies some of the other connections between a deeper hand at work. But ask yourself why. Okay, I don't want to be able to go through a few articles this week. Out of the AP from Saturday by Yura S. Karmanow, Kiev demonstrators attack Russian banks, which is interesting because it was the Kiev forces that took over from the Russian President Yanukovych. He had to flee the country. Now, this article talks about after which Russia annexed Crimea. I don't know if that's accurate. Either way, because the Russian annexing of Crimea, of course, resulted in the big international to-do and calling them out and their aggressiveness and such. But of course, the president that fled, whether it was before or after Crimea was annexed, was elected by the Russian people, the same Russian people that elected to annex the Crimea. I mean, that was the intention of the Russian people. That's why that president either did that or was going to do that, or whatever the case was, that his fleeing was occasioned by then the annexing of Crimea, and then this great civil war that started because, of course, what's quite understood is how the U.S. went in and supported this alternative government, which has since taken over. And they're the ones in charge, and they're the ones that keep killing the Russians while we're accusing the Russians of supporting the people of that part of the Ukraine that have Crimea and other areas, right? That Russia's supporting them. Well, of course they are, because now you got U.S. NATO guns in there ready to, civil war like we're doing everywhere, right? I mean, is this not the pattern, Dad? Yemen, up there in Syria, everywhere, Iraq. It's all about this pushing against the other side now, creating hostilities on every front possible. So North and South Korea, to the point where, for whatever reason, North Korea has been seen as worthy of funding. They now are spending that money, and let's test our nuclear stuff, because of course, why shouldn't we be posturing like we're ready to blow somebody up? Because that's traditionally worked so well against the NATO allies. Those people, look at Venezuela, he did good. Look at Cuba, look how well anyone, and they didn't even have weapons. So now you got a weapon, good thinking. You spend all your country's money on weaponry instead of high-tech development or education or medical or something like that. Right, like other parts of the world have. No, you spent your money on weapons because, again, good bet, North Korea. So I'm just saying, I wonder why. Who advises them? Who thought it was a good idea? Who paid for their political party? I'm just betting it will come together. One other article that had to do kind of the financial thing important. I thought this is out of the AFP from Friday the 19th by Ian Timberlake. Saudi halts $3 billion in aid to Lebanon army. And I don't want to have to read all this right now. I want to get to this. There's an article I think that I want to end on as the point today. But just keep in mind now, this is Saudi money going to Shiites in Lebanon, see, because they're supported by Syria. So it's money to the Shias being cut. What have I been saying all along, Dad? That this real war on ISIS is. ISIS is but the mercenary army of the West that can't be really called anything because they aren't anything. They aren't any of these countries. It isn't Hezbollah. It isn't any of these people. It's a put together, funded by Saudi Arabia, Sunni army to go push back where all these Shia lines are. However, I don't know where they are. I mean, ask Business Insider. They seem to know where everything is. But that seems to be where all that money's going. And of course, there's other articles to talk about Saudi Arabia having, their worst economic times right now because of the price of oil. So they're tying it into that, but it's interesting that the money being cut isn't from some of the other programs that might be more feasible. It's being cut from one of their allies in the region who happens to be a Shiite-run army that sides with Syria. And so they're cutting the aid to them, which is, of course, going to mean they are that much more suspect to failure in that area. Hezbollah and such who have that much less power to hold on to places in that, strategic places in that area. And that, so what does that say to me, Dad, is we know we got somebody coming forth conquering and to conquer, right? There's going to be territory still has to be conquered, where here's 3 billion that won't be in the coffers of those guys right now. Okay, so here's another article, Dad. Well, I got a minute. Drogan, this is from AFP Stuart Williams, February 19th. The Drogan says, no doubt over Ankara attack, warns U.S. He's saying these Kurdish rebels that we're giving the guns to are the ones that, are doing these horrible attacks on him. I think, how many people were killed? 28 people dead? Right? You don't see the world putting a Turkish flag over their Facebook site, I'll bet. But the Syrian, anyway, I don't want to waste the time reading this article. Suffice it to say, here's another point of contention with Turkey and its NATO allies, right? Turkey saying, hey, U.S., watch it. You're giving weapons to people that are attacking us. We're not going to stand for that. We're not going to help you participate. You're going to create a problem here with us. So again, is that what finally aggravates and brings in our king of the north, if that's Turkey, which I'm convinced is the prophetic Gog of the scriptures? That is the area. That's the area of the 7 churches. That is the ancient seat of Satan. And that description of I know where you are and where Satan's seat is, if you want to bring it to that biblical perspective for a moment. Turkey, I've been saying, and so does Sheikh Hussein, and so does the Quranic view of eschatology. Turkey's a very important player in this, and they have been all through history. It's never ended, from the Crusades to the Ottoman Empire to now this modern version of a state that is a NATO ally and one of the, as we talked to, I think, Dad, in the last couple of 3 weeks, the second largest NATO army, in the area or something like that. So anyway, Drogan's pointing out, hey, you guys are funny. So isn't that interesting? Our guns are killing people in Ankara, Dad. That's what Turkey's saying. Even if we're saying no, it wasn't us. Well, we're funding these people. We're sending them the guns, and they're using them to go kill people in Turkey. So we're, of course, can only say, hey, we didn't know. But gosh, it's a pretty thin line there now before you have to say, well, we can't send them guns anymore. Oh, but we have to, Dad. Fight on ISIS, right? The fight against the Syrian regime that has to go because he's such a terrorist, right? Not because it's a Shia-Sunni thing, son of a gun. And that's where we get back to what I learned this week. That's what they're promoting in the Sunni world. It's a Shia-Sunni thing. So I'm almost there. Just to bring in one more hotspot. Pentagon says U.S. bombed IS training camp in Libya. And this is from Saturday, AP article by Robert Burns and Maggie Michael. And I don't really want to get into the details of that article either, but to point out that I'm sure everybody knows we bombed, and we seem to be making a big deal out of how we've bombed a training camp in Libya. And I say, we've terrorized, we found someone that needed to be killed, because when you read it, it's not any sustained program. It was simply, we've identified a target, boom, 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 we've bombed them, as if they just came out of nowhere. You mean the UN and everything that's gone on over there, the investment we made in getting rid of Gaddafi, and there's no investment on the ground. We have no intelligence. You don't imagine that we know and don't have to wait until there's any danger or whatever. You know, I mean, it's absurd to me the way everywhere we go in with our high tech and all our money in that area becomes destabilized, and it's never followed up like it was after World War I and the times of the Treaty of Versailles. That didn't fall back into the hands of radical Arabs. It fell into the hands of French and English authorities who were vastly outnumbered at the time in the region, and who at that time were facing Arabs who were vastly more congruous and homogenous as a people. But they did it with guns. The guns are bigger, and they always have been, and we can do it again if we wanted to. So I say there's a deeper plan afoot, and it has to tie back in, Dad, to this idea of 3 world wars, and this idea that, I'm sorry, it says that in the eschatology that Israel is destroyed. They don't win. It isn't a Zionist plan to take over the Middle East. That's on the surface because that plan doesn't succeed according to the eschatological view. And this false Messiah, that's what I want to argue. I wish I could with Sheikh Hussein. He says the false Messiah rises to declare himself Messiah. When? It says in my scripture, the false Messiah gets destroyed. It says Israel gets destroyed. So Israel doesn't become the ruling nation on earth. They don't ever get that power. Somebody else does, see? And that's why I say this caliph of this Sunni caliph gets that power. And he goes after the Jews, and they don't have to call him false Messiah. Where does it say that in the Bible, Dad? We're going to discuss a lot of this Wednesday. It's going to be a pretty good show, I believe. But it doesn't say that. It says the people of the prince that shall come will destroy the city. Well, that could be this prince that declares himself, I'm your Messiah now. And you're going to worship this image in your temple. You're going to worship me as your God. That's the blasphemous thing. And that causes a bunch of them to turn to Jesus. It's not like they've made an alternative choice. And that satisfies both the Quranic scripture that understands that the Messiah will declare himself Messiah, and the understanding of the Christian scriptures that he'll also be this one that conquers and has this power and will conquer Jerusalem, not for Jerusalem. So anyway, just throw that out there to give everybody some context. Now here's the last article, Dad, and I'll shut up for this week. And this is from Friday the 19th by Martin Matashak from the Fiscal Times. So this is our good white trash. This is what we're telling everybody with money. Russia unveils a new warplane, Dad, as fighter jet wars rage on. Okay? And now this article, which I don't have time to read today, but you know, Dad, this just has to be talked about at some point. Here's a country, like I say, what happened in the pattern of World War I. The League of Nations comes along and says, okay, you know, we need peace in the world. We can't let every country just build guns, build militaries, no matter what their ideology is, and go kill each other and fight each other because some nut or some very strong country like Prussia could threaten the whole world. So let's put in place some things. We can't let Germany do that again, and yet they did, and in a very short time, 20 years or so. That's all it took, with the investment of who? The industrialists. Well, now look at Russia. Unveils a new warplane as fighter jet wars rage on. And if you read it, you're going to find out, you know, you got this, you know, everybody's ordering and sending these new planes around the world to each other. Iran just ordered a bunch of these new warplanes from Russia. I mean, isn't that nice? I mean, I guess the sanctions aren't working. I guess looting Russia, breaking them in the same way that Germany was broken after World War I. I mean, broken, looted, in such agony that the industrialists came over and rebuilt an entire economy. Apparently for a purpose, because you can see who funded Hitler and the Nazi Party and all of that. And we know that all of that fits into this proposed purpose of the Second World War to expand communism and to demonstrate Nazism or this great threat to the Jew, so that it would create a sense of urgency in helping the Jews reestablish that homeland over there. All that was supposedly written beforehand as part of the reason for World War II, and just happens that's exactly what happened in history, so maybe it was written after the fact. But either way, as far as our discussion today goes, it still was the result of the fact that the people who won the war and had all the power allowed Russia to rebuild their military underneath their noses, apparently with funding that they provided for them, because the first part of them saw Russia completely looted by the provisions of the treaty at Versailles. So I see that pattern happening over again, Dad, and it's an easy one really to spot. But these articles are interesting in themselves from that, if you have that construct, to see the details of this stuff, these sort of planes. I mean, and these other companies, Saab, the company Saab that makes the cars. Not to be outdone, Sweden-based Saab plans to roll out a new generation of its Gripen fighters this spring. The Swedish and Brazilian air forces have already signed orders for the jet, which likely won't be airborne until 2018. Croatia, Bulgaria, and possibly Colombia have also expressed interest in the fighter. The Czech Republic, Thailand, and Hungary already fly Saab-made machines, which cost around $43 million each. And the company is in talks to add Slovakia to its roster. Yeah, because they're such a potent economic power with so many enemies in the world. Right, Dad? That they need $43 million fighter jets. Who's asking them to buy these? Who's suggesting that they should buy these things, Dad? That's your real answer, people, if you want to see what's going on in the world. Come on, look at that list of countries I just read you. Last I heard, Brazil was broke. Sweden's up in they've only got light 3 months out of the year, right? Saab's the only thing they produce besides some fine cookware and some, fishing industry. Not even. Come on, where's the economy to be in the defense business? Why Sweden? Why Saab building? Why is there a need? Croatia, Bulgaria, Colombia. Where do they get the money? And what need have they? Who have they got to go kill with jets? Because there's one big entity in the world that will shoot your jet down if you go against it or any of its, proclamations, won't it? So what good is your jet except to come in on that fight if they tell you to? I mean, can there be any other reason for them to have them? Anyway, Dad, the conversation could go on, but thanks for carrying me this far. Congratulations on your anniversary yesterday. I love you guys. I'll talk to you next week.
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right. And it was another superb analysis of this week's happenings in the news in the Middle East. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube. And comment, drop us a line, subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.